One thing I always maintain and have maintained it since 2016 is that the British public was going to get a very, very rude awakening when it came to the issue of regulations. Because here's the thing, regulations are pretty important, but most regulations you don't even realize you are probably in contact with in your daily life. You don't realize the benefit that you get from most regulations. Most of the time, you never have to interact with any serious problems because of those regulations, because they are there to make sure that those problems do not occur in the first place. Or if a problem does occur, then at least you have some sort of recompense to deal with that situation. Regulations are hugely important, but I will be the first to admit this, regulations and trying to explain regulations to the British public is boring. I am not going to lie. Like, trying to discuss the topic of regulations is so dry. It's a nightmare. And trust me, this comes from someone who worked in marketing, especially during the height of GDPR, and constantly had to not only learn GDPR myself as a form of regulation, but then had to make sure that I was telling other people about GDPR, why it was so important, and why they had to follow it. And of course, the consequences that would happen if they did not follow GDPR. And that's why you got a lot of people, especially during that time, will scare them to death so that then they at least listen to us when it comes to us talking about GDPR, because it was so difficult to get the idea of having to follow these regulations, honestly, across to a lot of businesses. But regulations are important. And here's one, of course, that is continually coming up with the British public: the environmental regulations, because we can almost see the impact. If you, let's say, lose a regulation, I don't know, about your phone or maybe glasses or something like that, you might not initially feel the impact, but environmental regulations have seemed to really break through and the importance of having these regulations. And this really comes, as we're about to see, twofold. First of all, that the current UK government has had no interest in following up, enforcing, or even strengthening environmental regulations, despite the fact, of course, many of the Brexiteers would say that no, this is not why we're doing Brexit, because we want to strengthen our environmental regulations. We're not going to lower them. We're going to only increase them. We're going to have the best regulations in the world. Of course, cue up several clips of Brexiteers now saying after that fact that we should just completely have an absolute bonfire of regulations. Indeed, the government had two massive defeats in the House of Lords very recently over environmental regulations of that fact. The flooding that we've just had in recent times as well. A lot of people have suddenly realized, the government really didn't seem to follow any flooding violations or any of the regulations that it said it would in the wake of the last serious flooding. Why didn't they? And thus, we are getting the rude awakening of why regulations are so important. But this obviously will have a big impact, because not only now are we no longer following EU water monitoring standards, turns out that because we are not following these watering standards, that, well, the situation in England's rivers is getting increasingly worse. And as we said, I think last time before, there is no water police, the people in charge of these regulations who would enforce these rules and regulations. And as we're about to see, the government is about to abdicate all responsibility for these regulations to essentially not-for-profit charities or organizations. That is not how you should be running a very, very crucial, important factor of environmental regulation, by handing it over to these types of companies. Yes, they are important, and yes, these types of things should exist. But the last thing I would do is give them, you know, hey, is this river safe? Is it all right? I don't know. You guys check it. We're just going to leave you to it. Yeah, that seems hugely like everything could go wrong. And trust me, stuff is already going horrifically wrong with UK water and riverways. It's not just sewage outflow that we should also be concerned about, but it's also the fact that the environmental impact of these rivers is going absolutely catastrophically wrong as well. So before we go more into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a motivation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So, The Guardian was covering this. This is what they had to say about this. That the UK government is going to diverge from the EU standards of monitoring water quality in England, it can be revealed. Campaigners now fear that this change would lead to more pollution in England's rivers and waterways if the new measuring methods are now less rigorous. While in the EU, England was covered by the Water Framework Directive, which meant that the National and Chemical Ecological Survey of Rivers was conducted annually. After Brexit, the WTF was transposed into English law, but the government removed the requirement to conduct annual tests. So we no longer now conduct annual tests of our rivers and waterways. And guess what? In 2002, we found that most of our rivers do not even meet good standards for good water quality. Bear in mind, we ain't conducting annual tests. And then, of course, this is the other one that you should look at. In 2019, the last time that full water assessments took place, just 14% of rivers were in good ecological health, and none met the standards for good chemical health. And the government has said it does not intend to deliver a complete update until 2025, and the last permissible date under the new WFD. This is why it's not only you make sure that you have the laws or the regulations in place, it then comes to the fact that how do you make sure that these laws are being followed? How do you make sure that these laws and regulations are in place? This is where I call them the regulation police in this case. You make sure that you have the department fully funded and staffed, ready to be able to do this. But guess what? Because since Brexit, not only were these departments not staffed properly, not funded properly, they have not been able to do their job, meaning that you have seen a massive collapse in standards across the board. It is not just things like environmental regulation where these things have been relaxed. We've seen things like, suspicious meat. We've had the thing about we did this recently about all the salmonella outbreak in the eggs. This is now forming a continuing pattern where we are seeing this. And it's not just one-offs, it's a continuing pattern that we are seeing where the regulations should be followed, but they are not being followed because we do not have essentially the police, the enforcement networks that we used to have when we're in the EU to make sure that these were followed. And of course, as I said, the public is going to get a very, very rude awakening from this. And I just want to read the comment from Stuart Singleton White of the Angling Trust. This is what he had to say about this. So the WTF has been the bedrock of understanding the state of our rivers, lakes, and groundwater. It does not give a full picture, but it does provide a very useful starting point. The past assessments have shown that things are getting worse, not better. To now not have a full assessment in 2022 and have to wait until 2025 simply sows confusion and leaves the public in the dark when it comes to properly understanding whether our rivers are getting better or worse. And I love this because this was also a meeting that happened, and this is what the reason the government have given as to why these assessments aren't being cut out. And to be honest, the answer the government gives you should not surprise you. Government officials told stakeholders in a meeting in 2022 that only a limited number of water bodies were assessed due to the COVID-19 pandemic and budget cuts. Once again, austerity rearing its head, as we always said it would in this case, because they've got no interest in properly funding these bodies and stuff like that. And here's the thing: I guarantee you, if these bodies had been properly funded, wouldn't have mattered during the pandemic because you can still go out and test these things. You might have had to do it a bit differently, but I guarantee you, if they had been properly funded, properly financed, these bodies could have gone out, checked it, and brought back some actual good data. It's not just having good regulations, it is making sure that you have people who are looking, are these rules and regulations being enforced? And then if they are not, that then there is comes, the punishment that, oh, you are not following rules and regulations. Here's what you need to do. Here's what we want to see to improve this. In this case, it would be the water companies, which we have been seeing very recently. A lot of them are in dire financial straits because, well, most of them have become, so we say, privately owned, foreign owned, and have been giving massive dividends to their shareholders rather than actually, investing in the network, to make it better, to make sure that these sewer overflows don't occur. Um, yeah, this is just going to be a continuing story. It always is a continuing story, and it would not surprise me if in the future we do continue to see continuing stories about the worsening state of our rivers. Um, so much so for all those grand Brexit promises that we were going to have so much better environmental rules, laws, and regulations. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.